Ma'am, can we start?
Yeah, hi. I'm just going to share the video, the PowerPoint. 1 second. Thank you.
Okay. Greetings from the Department of Psychology of St. Joseph's College Autonomous. We warmly welcome you to One Breath at a Time, a webinar for social anxiety. Thank you so much for attending this webinar and showing patience for the past week and a half. We're so sorry if we created any inconvenience. We also, since this is entirely virtual, we apologize in advance if there's any glitches to the video or the PPT. We will try our best to bring it back on and as quick as we can. I would like to first mention some of the guidelines we have for the webinar. So I'm praying everyone is in here. Just a second. I'll just mention that in 2 minutes. Hi, so sorry. Okay, first the guidelines. This entire webinar will be streaming on two platforms, YouTube Live and Google Meets. So to all those who are viewing this webinar from the Google Meets app platform, please try your best to not share your screen or unmute yourself as there may be some technological glitches. So please try your best not to, present your screen accidentally. Second, if you'd like to ask a question to Ms. Balasundaram, you can mention it in the chat option, and this goes for people who are also viewing it from the YouTube live. You can mention your question, and ma'am will be answering it during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Next guideline is that the chat option is open for all, but please do not express any vulgarity or hate towards each other. This is a safe space, and our college does not condone hate speech whatsoever. Our next guideline is that this entire webinar will be 45 minutes long, with the last 15 minutes being the Q&A session. During this is when time when ma'am will be looking at your questions and answering them. Last guideline is that we will be pinning a form, a feedback form on both the live chat options. So this feedback form will be asking you what went wrong in this webinar for you or what are your thoughts on it. And it'll also be asking for your name and your email ID. Your name is required to be entered onto an e-certificate and your email ID for us to send the e-certificate to you. So if you'd like an e-certificate, please please fill the feedback form. With that, I extend this moment to Ms. Nita Pereira, the head of the Department of Psychology, to introduce Ms. Balasundaram. Ma'am, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Anushka. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever in the world you're logged in from. I have the privilege of introducing Ms. Aparna Balasundaram. We're so happy you're here with us, Aparna. Ms. Aparna Balasundaram has an extensive profile, and I'm going to cut it down because we really don't have too much time. Now, Ms. Aparna is a acclaimed psychotherapist, author, a TEDx speaker, and a teaching associate in Columbia University, New York. She's a true academician who has written and been part of a number of published articles, domestic and international, and also is an engaging speaker invited to speak in many international conferences. She has also founded 3 organizations which aim to promote wholesome and a prosperous living on 3 levels: individuals, educational institutions, and corporates. Her published book, Trials and Triumphs, described the lives of 41 Indian women with thought provoking life stories that inspire us all. Former Vice President of India, Sri Hamid Ansari, launched her work as well. Her premier educational qualification include a Master of Science from NYU, a pre-doctoral from NIMANS, a Masters of Social Work from TIS. Her accolades also include the Dean Award from NYU and a Special Recognition Award from National Alliance for Mental Health, New Jersey, for her contributions to the South Asian community. A very hearty welcome to you, Aparna, and a very hearty welcome to all of you gathered here from the principal, from all our management. We welcome you to this webinar. Over to you, Aparna.
Thank you so much, Anita, for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, and truly a privilege to be here, connecting with all of you and being able to share from some of my clinical experience. So thank you again for reaching out, and my sincere hope is that for the next 40 minutes or so, some of the things that I share will resonate with many of you, and some of the key messages that I want to kind of share will be. Will be left as food for thought. So thank you again, and welcome everybody to our session today. So we're going to have 5 steps across this roadmap, like I shared. The first is we're going to talk about what is social anxiety. Next is how does it manifest. We then are going to look at this distinction that very often comes up, right? Is introversion and shyness the same as social anxiety, or is it different? And then we're going to look at some strategies of how do you manage social anxiety, and then we open it up for Q&A. So that's our plan for today, and thank you again to the organizers for having realized the need for this, and having been progressive enough to take the step to organize a session like this. So thank you again. I do appreciate us doing this collaboratively. Wonderful. So good. So let's dive right in. So what is social anxiety? Right. And I'm not going to be very clinical about it. I wanted, the way I kind of designed the session was so that it's, anybody who's kind of listening, will get a true sense of what social anxiety is, right? So essentially, there are 3 things we want to remember, right? The first thing is that social anxiety is an intense, persistent fear of what? Of being watched and judged by others when I'm in a social situation, right? And we're going to look at some examples of what these possible social situations could be, right? The second is now, because of this intense, persistent fear that I'm going to be watched and judged by others when I'm in a social situation, I feel that I'm going to do something wrong, right? And hence I'm going to do something that's really embarrassing. And because of that, I'm going to feel humiliated. And the key word here is rejected and judged by others, right? So because I feel this way, and because of this anticipatory anxiety almost of being rejected, how does that impact me? Well, then this fear will affect my work. It affects my school and all my other day-to-day activities, right? And essentially, with a lot of clients that I worked with, some of the extreme cases have been that they completely isolate themselves, right? And this is the issue with social anxiety, right? So like I said, how does social anxiety manifest, right? So before we jump into that, I want to kind of just take a step back and acknowledge the fact that all of us, me, you, everybody, right, we all have felt nervous at some point or the other, right? So we all know what feeling anxious feels like, right? We all have that sweaty palms. We've had, butterflies in our stomach. We may have like a tension headache, and we've all been there, including me, right? And this could be in any kind of social situation, right? Whether it's public speaking, and I know a lot of you are students who perhaps are listening. So whether it's making, a presentation in front of your peers, entering a room full of strangers. So we've all been there, right? But the point is that even though we felt anxious, and even though, it feels overwhelming, we have pushed through, right? We somehow get through, right? And that's important to remember, right? However, if one has social anxiety, the stress is so overwhelming that it's almost too much to handle, right? And hence, I'm not even able to tolerate it. And because of that, right, I try to avoid all kinds of social contact. Right, and that is the key for social anxiety. So now let's look at some of the common situations that others may find really easy to be in. But for me, it's really hard if I have social anxiety, right? So, for example, talking to strangers, right? Speaking in public, which we just spoke about, making eye contact, dating, and this may be for the the younger people or anybody, I guess, out there. For some people, even using the public restrooms, right? Because the whole negotiations of I'm waiting for someone to come out, and then I have to go in. I'm standing next to someone. I've got to wash my hands. So even just being in closed public spaces sometimes is hard. Then, of course, going to parties, especially when I don't know anybody there, for a lot of people with social anxiety, eating in front of people, right, is hard because what if what if there's food stuck around? What if I drop something? It's going to be so embarrassing. What if I'm eating with a fork and the fork falls off? So again, it's the anxiety of calling attention to yourself when you don't want to. Right. And then, of course, like I said, starting conversations. So these are some of the common ways that social anxiety manifests. Now, why is it a big deal? I had a client who said, well, Aparna, you know what? I feel socially anxious, so why can't I just isolate, right? I mean, why do I need to even talk about the social anxiety, right? What if I just isolate in my home? And I guess given our current situation with COVID-19, where social distancing and isolating is something that, is almost a recommendation. Recently, when I spoke to one of my clients I was working with, she was like, you know what? This is almost like a boon to me, right? I mean, this is now, I have permission to isolate. But the point is that cannot be a way of life forever, right? It may work in the moment, but it cannot work forever. And hence that's the problem with social anxiety. And that's the reason for those of us that might, be dealing with it, we've got to reach out and get help, right? Because social anxiety, like I've written there in the red font up here, prevents you from living your life, full stop. Right. And that's the reason you've got to engage with the world around you, right? Instead of trying to isolate. And the bottom line is, when I try to avoid all social situations, right, I'm really missing out on experiencing life, the good and the bads of life, right? And then from a clinical perspective, this might lead to low self-esteem, negative thoughts. I'm really sensitive to people criticizing me, and poor social skills because I don't know how to, engage in conversation. How do you enter a conversation? How do you stay in a conversation? How do you exit a conversation? Those skills because I haven't practiced it and I've isolated, it doesn't really help, right? And for many, it may end with me feeling really depressed about just the whole purpose of life, right? And life really, without us relating with others, sometimes might seem meaningless for many people, right? So good. So out of our 5 steps, I know it looks like we've moved fast, but we'll be spending a larger chunk of our time really in the strategies. But I wanted to kind of just set the stage before that. So we've looked at what is social anxiety. We just spoke about how does it manifest. Now I'd like us to spend a few minutes just kind of looking at introversion and social anxiety. Is it the same or is it different, right? And as a self-confessed introvert, I know that when very often people meet me, they don't believe that I'm an introvert, but I am a closeted introvert, and I am a self-confessed introvert. And I think that there are more introverts in this world than we actually realize. But the key difference between introversion and social anxiety, right? To first of all answer that question is, it is different. Right? Sure, the fact is that there may be many introverts who might have social anxiety, but just because I'm an introvert, it doesn't automatically mean that I have social anxiety. And I love this picture, which actually I got of HuffPost, so the credit goes to them for this little image that you see up there, which very nicely describes the difference between social anxiety and an introvert, right? So for an introvert, being in a crowd, right, being in a party, I can be there if I have to be there, right? But really, I'd rather just go home and just hang out with, like they have over here, your pet or your family or music or a good book. So it kind of gets overstimulating, right? Being in a larger crowd for an introvert. However, if I have social anxiety, the issue is not the overstimulation of the larger crowd, but rather it is I'm feeling that people are looking at me, right? I'm feeling judged. I feel that everybody hates me, right? I feel I'm so awkward and that I'm going to embarrass myself, right? So that's the distinction between an introvert and a social, so it's someone having social anxiety. And when we club the two together, I truly believe you're doing a disservice to both categories of people, right? So the key here for many of you, and I'm sure this is, and what I'm sharing, I'm hoping rings and resonates with a lot of you, that clearly there's a difference between introversion and social anxiety, right? And for those of you that are introverts or who would like to know more about the distinction, I love Susan Cain's work, and she has this wonderful book that's known as Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Cannot Stop Talking. Right. And she kind of talks about, and I have that quote up there, that there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best idea. Right. And if you want to learn more about her and her work in this whole space of introversion, I would recommend that you check her TED Talk out. I think it's one of the most watched TED Talks so far, and it's pretty interesting, and there's some great insights that many of you might pick up from there. So I would definitely recommend listening to her, and and I believe she has a website where she has a lot of freely available resources. So do check that out. So her name is Susan Cain, and the name is up here, right? So I'm hoping you guys can see my arrow as I kind of point towards that. Great. So now let's get into the meat of our session, right? So we've looked at what is social anxiety, how does it manifest, and is there a difference between one's personality trait, which is an introverted personality trait, and anxiety? And the answer is yes, right? So now let's look at, okay, what do we do about this, right? So I think I can hear someone in the background. So if everybody wants to just mute themselves, please, that would be helpful. Or, if the administrator can kind of mute everybody, that might be good, just so that it doesn't disturb the others. Good, thank you for that. Okay, great. So coming back to the 5 ways, so there are many ways. I just want to kind of put that out there, right? There are many ways that one can manage social anxiety, right? I'm going to just look at 5 today that I'd like us to kind of look at, and let this be a starting point for you to be able to do more and just introspect more, right? So the first thing, like with anything, right, is really acknowledging how I feel, right? And not hiding or denying my feelings. I think that is so important, right? Realize that anxiety is natural. Like I said, we all, me, you, everybody, right, has faced anxiety at some point, right? We know what feeling anxious feels like, right? So anxiety is natural, right? So we've got to let go of the shame of feeling anxious, right? With social anxiety, like I said, the issue though is that it is persistent, and usually from a clinical perspective, they say the feelings have to be consistent and persistent over 6 months, right? And it impacts your day-to-day functioning, right? So that's the difference, right? But the point is that anxiety, like happiness, is a natural feeling. Anger is a natural feeling, so is anxiety, right? So we've got to let go of the shame. So don't deny or hide your feelings. The first thing is really acknowledging and embracing our anxiety, because once I acknowledge it, then I'm able to move forward and do something about it, right? So I think to me, that's really sometimes the biggest step, right? And very often when clients reach out to me, that's a sign of courage, right? To me, that's a sign of them knowing that they want better and they deserve better. So it's not a sign of weakness, right? Reaching out for professional help with a therapist is not a sign of weakness. In fact, to me, it truly is a sign of having the courage to introspect and look at ways to kind of move forward, right? So similarly, even with social anxiety, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on this place because I think that is key, right? That once I acknowledge how I feel and I don't deny it, that opens the door for me to kind of start making changes, right? So the first step is opening that door. I don't know how many of you have read or heard about Brené Brown. Wonderful speaker. Again, she also has stuff on TED, on TED Talks, and I encourage you guys to look at that. And I love this quote from her. Right, she says, "Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do." right? And she writes this from her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Um, and I think, and like I said, that's really the first step, right? We've got to own our story, the good, bad, and the ugly, and we all have ugly parts to our lives, right? But we've got to own all of it, right? Because that's being brave. That's opening that door so that I'm able to then invite change in, right? So that's the first step. Great. So, and the other reason it's important for us to acknowledge, our anxiety is because otherwise, in my experience, a lot of people will use negative coping mechanisms or strategies to deal with social situations. And I'm sure many of you who are listening to me right now will, as I say this, will nod your head and say, hey, you know what, that sounds like me, right? Because for a lot of people, when they're feeling really nervous around, their peers or being in a social situations, they turn to alcohol and drugs in the hope that that will drown out the anxiety and it will give you a fake sense of social confidence, right? But we know that that's an unhealthy coping mechanism. It's not sustainable. And we all know alcohol and drugs is not the answer to anything in life, right? So really, we don't want to get, trapped in that vicious cycle. Or, and I see this a lot over the younger generation, I'm in a room and I'm on my screen, right? So I don't want to engage with you because I'm feeling nervous. So I just hang out in a space and I kind of, sometimes even just pretend that I'm, on my phone, so that I'm kind of losing myself in the virtual world, even when I'm in, a space with real people where I can engage, in the moment, right? So very often we turn to this, and I can understand truly as to why these may seem like good avenues, but like I said, it's really not. These are unhealthy for various reasons, right? So the point is that we all need to find a healthy way to deal with social anxiety, right? So now let's look at some of the other ways that we can deal with it in positive ways, or at least neutral ways, right? The first is, and this may sound like a mouthful when I'm going to say this, it's known as it's something fun for those of you that are from the social sciences and the psychology background will know what I'm talking about. It's known as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And this is one of the most recommended, this is scientifically documented, go-to method for social anxiety, right? So I've kind of taken some things from that as I kind of share this, right? So the first thing is known as reframing your thoughts. So instead of having my negative, anxious thoughts, is there a way I can reframe it? So I'm going to, so though this isn't a completely experiential interactive session, since it's a webinar, I'm going to try and bring in some elements where I'll ask you questions. You don't have to answer, so please don't put the mic on to answer it. I'm just asking it more as a rhetoric, but you can answer it aloud, where you are, right? So that, we're kind of engaging in that sense virtually. So great. So let's say there's a situation where you see your peer and you see your teacher and you wave to them, or you catch that, or you think you've got their eye and you say, good morning, right? But they don't wish you back, right? What are some of the thoughts that you might feel? So I want you to just kind of, I'm going to pause for maybe 10 seconds and I want you all to think about that. So when a peer or a teacher doesn't wish you good morning back, right, you're in that social situation, you wish someone and they don't acknowledge you. What are some of the thoughts that might run in my head, especially the negative, anxious thought? Good. So I paused so that you all had some time to kind of think about it, right? So I'm hoping you have some ideas in your mind. So let me give you some things that I've heard people say, right? So possibly an anxious negative thought could be, they don't like me. I know I should have just kept my head down and avoided eye contact, right? I shouldn't even look up and see people. Or they said, I must have sounded really stupid, wishing them and they didn't even respond back. I wonder who all saw that. So then right away, I'm worried about, the people around me and they're going to make fun of me. And I embarrassed myself because I said hi to this person and they didn't acknowledge me. And the whole world now knows that, that was so stupid, right? So the next time, lesson learned, Aparna, I'm not going to wish anybody. Just keep your head down, no eye contact, walk, avoid the world, right? So that could be my anxious negative thought, right? For many of us that might be dealing with social anxiety. Now, how do we reframe it? Like I said, using cognitive behavioral therapy, we try to reframe a negative thought to, even if we can't reframe it to a positive, perhaps I reframe it to a neutral thought. So in all possibility, when someone doesn't acknowledge you back, in all possibility, the reality really is that maybe she didn't see me, right? Maybe I need to wish her louder, or maybe she's preoccupied, maybe something's, happening in her life, right? And hence she didn't acknowledge me. So it has really nothing to do with me, right? Rather, it might have something to do with that person who was kind of preoccupied, and hence they didn't respond back, right? So I'm hoping that makes sense, and I'm hoping you all are connecting the dots as I'm sharing this. So now I'm going to break this down a little more, and we're going to actually kind of go through these steps, right? So before that, like I said, what is cognitive reframing? It's a technique that recasts my negative thought into something that's more neutral or positive, right? And in 90% of the cases, neutral and positive are the more realistic thoughts, right? Okay, so let's look at how we do this, right? So this is known as, like I said, cognitive reframing, where I take my cognition, which are the thoughts in my mind, and I try to reframe them. I try to rescript them in a way that is more neutral, right? Which is not harming myself, right? So this is known as the 3 C's approach. And for those of you that might be dealing with social anxiety, or even just anxious thoughts, right? Or even with depressive thoughts and sadness. And I know these are such, it's such a difficult time right now that, for many of us. So I think this is something that is good for all of us. And I sometimes still use this for myself, right? So I think this is one of the strategies that is good for all people to know. So I'd love for all of you to kind of pay attention as I'm kind of sharing this with you. So like I said, it's known as the 3 C's. So what are the 3 C's? Catch it, check it, change it, right? So I'll just go through that again. It's catch it, check my thought, and I change it. So let's look at how that happens, right? So, and I've broken this down to keep it really simple. And for those of you that want more information, there's tons of information out there. But I'll just pause. For those that do require help, you must ideally do this with a professional. I'm just kind of sharing this more at a high level, right? So I'm not advocating self-therapy here necessarily, because sometimes that doesn't work. You do need to connect with someone who's a professional. But here's something to kind of just give you a taste of how you can perhaps start using some of these things. So coming back to the 3 C's, catch it, check it, change it. First is catch it, right? So the moment there's a negative thought, I've got to stop. It's almost like, you put your hand up, that stop sign in your mind, and ask yourself this question: am I thinking negatively? Is this really true that everybody is looking at me and they're judging me and they're waiting for me to fail, and I'm so embarrassing and I'm so awkward? So I've got to, first of all, introspect and recognize the negative thoughts, right? And that's the catch it piece. The next step is, okay, now I check it and I test it. Is there really evidence that everybody is looking at me? Is there really evidence that everybody, thinks I'm awkward, thinks I'm a loser, is waiting for me to fall and, flat on my face? So I check it, right? And I test and I see, could there be another way of me looking at this negative thought, right? So going back to our first example, where my teacher or my peer doesn't, respond back to me, instead of owning the negativity, right? Oh, there must be something wrong with me and how embarrassing, and hence they didn't, they don't like me. Instead of trying to own that, I test it and I try to flip it around and see, is there another way to look at it? And the other way to then look at it is when I change it and I reframe it in a more neutral or positive, right? And the more neutral way in this case could be, well, maybe they didn't see me, maybe they are preoccupied, I wonder what happened, maybe I just wasn't loud enough, right? Maybe they actually have their contact lenses usually and they didn't have their contact lenses on that day, maybe they didn't see me, right? Who knows, right? It could be a zillion other examples, rather than me just filtering in and owning the negative, right? So that's the catch it, check it, change it. So I change my negative thought by taking action and reframing it in a more neutral way, right? So again, very quickly, just to capture it, step 1 is catch it, step 2, check it, step 3, change it, right? And like I said, practice makes perfect. So it's important that you keep practicing it, right? So be more in tune with your emotions and your feelings. And that is why I said the starting point really is acknowledging how we feel and embracing it, because only then do we open that door for things like the 3 C's to happen, right? So good. So I'm going to look at another quick example, right? And at the end of this, I'll be happy to kind of collate some of the worksheets I'm sharing right now, and I'll share it with the team at St. Joseph's, and I'm sure they'll be able to share that on with you. So let's look at this situation, right? If I go to a party, I will have to talk, right? And I'm so awkward. Everyone is going to be looking at me. They're going to judge me. It's so embarrassing. So best to just stay at home and watch the show, right? So I want all of you, I'm going to pause now. I'm going to kind of take you through this. How would you catch that thought, right? The moment I think this way, catch it, the first say, right? So what could be some of the negative thoughts from the situation that we have up here? I'm not going to give you the answers. I want you guys to think about it, right? So I'm going to pause for like 3 seconds as you kind of think about it. Great. So I'm hoping you all were able to identify the negative thoughts. Now we check it. Is there real evidence to back this up, right? Is everybody really going to be looking at me? Do people come to a party to look at me and judge me? I don't think so, right? Most people will come to a party to kind of enjoy themselves, right? They're not coming there to judge other people, right? That's the bottom line, right? Do you go to a party to judge other people? No, you go there to hang out, have a good time, let your hair down, or even a meeting, right? I'm just using party as because I realize most of the audience might be younger folks, but it could also be to a meeting, right? If I'm working and I'm going to a meeting, everybody doesn't come to a meeting waking up in the morning to say, hey, you know what, today in the meeting we're going to embarrass Aparna and judge her and criticize her. No one does that, right? So we're checking it and then we change it. So how do I change it? Which is the last thing. So maybe it's not best for me to stay at home and watch the show, right? I've got to get out. I've got to engage. I actually want to go to this meeting. I actually want to go to this party. I want to go to this restaurant, right? So that's how I change it. Great. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Okay, good. We have another 20 minutes or so for this. Great. Okay. The next strategy is something that's really day to day, right? So these are simple things that you can start using right away. So if there's a meeting or you have a class, make sure you arrive early, because a lot of people with social anxiety, the anxiety is about entering a crowded room. So this is really simple, right? Why you should try and be maybe the first 4 or 5 people who are in that room, right? So that you're not feeling overwhelmed when you see a room full of people, right? Next is, in order to have conversations, I would highly recommend staying up to date on some of the current events so that you can have small talk, right? And I'm going to reinforce this, alcohol and substances, please don't use it to try and overcome your inhibitions. It really doesn't help, right? The fourth, of course, is exercising regularly. I know at these times it's hard for us to go out and exercise, so you've got to be creative and try to exercise within your homes and within the four walls of your home, right? So these are just some really quick ways to do it. And so I gave you not a heavier is the wrong word perhaps, but a more intense way, which was the cognitive reframing. And now the second strategy I've kind of talked about is just the day-to-day strategies, right? So if you see, we've looked at you acknowledge and embrace it. The second was reframing your thoughts. And the third one we just looked at was, simple stuff that you can do right away. That's really just practical things, right? Day-to-day strategies. Okay, so now we're going to move into the fourth one. This again is based more from clinical theories of learning and behavior and cognition. It's known as graded exposure and fear hierarchy. So I do want to share here that this is best done with someone who can give you that professional help and working within a support groups. And that's why I've highlighted this here: graded exposure and fear hierarchy. If it reaches an extent of going beyond just social anxiety, and especially if it's like phobias, please do this with someone who can support you in a professional manner, who's trained in this, right? But like I said, in the meantime, I'm just kind of sharing, and educating you. We call it psychoeducation, just educating you on what this is, so that now that you know about it, the intent really is that you reach out to someone who's a professional and can help you with this, right? So my intent is more coming from a psychoeducational space, where I'm sharing with you that, hey, you know what, these are the possibilities. Don't look at just alcohol and drugs. Don't just isolate yourself. Don't get lost in your phone. There are healthier ways to deal with this, right? So let's get cracking. Good. Okay, so you see that there's a pyramid here, right? And essentially, what we're going to do through this is we're going to create a hierarchy of all my fears or things that make me anxious, right? Because there are varying degrees, right? It's not like that everything is makes me anxious, right? There's a degree and there's a hierarchy, right? So the first thing that all of us can do is to identify, assess, and organize my fears. I'm going to repeat that again. Is to identify, assess, and organize my fears and anxieties into these three levels, from the least fear, which is the green, which I can tolerate, to the most fears, which is really difficult for me to tolerate, which is in the red zone, right? And once I'm able to complete this, this becomes a guide, right, of my graded exposure to overcome and manage my situations, right? So a simple way of looking at it is, if for those of us that perhaps, and I don't know how many of you can, can relate to this. Um, when we're learning to swim, right? So there's one school of thought that says throw them into the deep end and people will figure it out, right? The other school of thought is, which this is based on, which is known as graded, right? So one step by step we get to where we need to go, says that instead of just throwing someone into the deep end and they'll figure it out, and hope that they don't drown, is how do I step by step teach them, the methods or the ways so that they're able to move in a more, in a safer, in a smoother way, right? And that's known as a graded exposure. So let's look at a sample here, right? So I kind of created a sample for us of what this hierarchy looks like. So if you look here right at the bottom, I can easily tolerate this. Speaking to my friends, perhaps going to a shop that I usually go to, asking a shopkeeper for things. Sometimes ordering in a restaurant is hard for me, but if it's a known restaurant, maybe and it's a known, person who takes the orders, then I can order at a restaurant, making eye contacts with others, right? So as you can see, there's a hierarchy even within this, right? I can tolerate it, right? Then I come to the moderately tolerable, right? Asking a stranger for directions, sometimes that's hard for me, right? Having a one-to-one conversation with a new person, right? A new peer, a new friend, a new colleague, these are moderately tolerable, right? So this is in the yellow space, right? And then we move to the one where the social anxiety is in full form, 100%, right? Where it's difficult to tolerate. For example, going to a party where I don't know anybody, or going to a meeting where I don't know anybody. And then I think for most people is actually public speaking, right? Doing a presentation, right? Being in a room full of people where everybody's eyes are towards me and I think that they all are judging me, and I'm going to mess up and I'm going to stutter and I'm going to stammer, I'm going to sound like an idiot, I have nothing meaningful to share. All these negative thoughts are in my head, right? As I get prepped to do a presentation, right? So for most people, public speaking or doing a presentation in front of others in a social situation can be extremely debilitating almost, right? So let's look at this as an example, right? Going to a party where I do not know anybody. So let's see how that looks like if that's my situation. Now here is that graded exposure, right? Like I said, we take one goal and then we move from the least anxious to my final goal. So let's start with, and this is something you all can create for yourselves. And like I said, if you really want to kind of do this in the most effective way, I would say you want to work with a professional, but at least this you can, kind of start creating and then work with, someone who actually knows how they can help you through this process, right? So let's say there's an 8-step for this situation. So let's start with, week one, I'm just going to have a conversation with a known friend. And once I do it, I check it off, right? So there are various other sheets that actually go with all of this. I haven't really, in interest of time, I haven't really shared all of that. And like I said, this really should be done more from a clinical space. So the first thing is really having that conversation. Once I do it, check off. Right. Second, and then I also see, how stressful was it, right? It's known as SUDS. But like I said, I'm getting more into a clinical space now. The second is, okay, once I have a conversation with a known friend, can I have a conversation with a classmate or a casual acquaintance, who I really don't know too well? So that's my second step of this ladder. So almost imagine yourself walking up a ladder, right? Second step of the ladder is doing that. Third is starting a casual one-to-one chat with an unknown person, right? So maybe I'm in a shop, I'm asking someone, maybe I'm in the lift, maybe it's in the cafeteria. And I'm not saying this is a long conversation, and of course it can't be a creepy conversation, but I'm hitting upon someone. Can't do that. It has to be a socially appropriate conversation, but it's really just being able to connect with someone who's unknown, right? And it could just be one or two sentences that one shares. The fourth is going out to eat in a restaurant with a mixed group of friends and casual acquaintances, right? Fifth is going to a party with friends and making eye contact and smiling at someone. So I'm still not talking to them, right? I'm just making eye contact and smiling at people, right? That I perhaps don't know. Then the sixth step is now I talk to someone who's new, whether it's at a party, whether it's at a meeting, whether it's at a conference. We can stretch this out to different examples. Then seventh, and I think this gets hard for a lot of people, is joining a conversation with an unknown person, right, in either a meeting or a conference, right? And then the final step is, which is my situation that I was trying to look at, is actually entering a party or meeting, going to a meeting or a conference or a seminar where I don't know anybody. So there's a room full of people, don't know anybody, but can I get there, right? So instead of diving into the deep end, which is step 8, right? Like I said, we take baby steps and kind of go this way, and hence I use the analogy of swimming and learning how to swim. So we don't throw someone in the deep end, which is point A, but I go step by step so that eventually I'm able to swim, so that eventually I'm able to attend this party or meeting or summit or conference, right? So that's the way this works. So good. So I'm conscious of the time. Okay, great. So we're nearly there. Okay, so this is something that I love, gratitude. I think we don't count our blessings enough. I think because we sometimes become so self-centered and focused on all the things that we don't have, I forget the things that I do have. Right. So this is something that I would highly recommend all of us keep, just a gratitude journal, gratitude, thoughts. And from that stems your mindfulness practice, right? Okay, so here's a question for all of you, right? Again, like I said, don't answer it. This is a rhetoric question. What do you see here? Okay, I'm thinking most of you are going to say, well, Aparna, we see a horse. Correct? Right answer. Now, what do you see? I'm going to assume that most of you are thinking, well, Aparna, we see a frog. Now, what do you see? Horse. And now what do I see? Frog. Right? So I'm not sure if you guys are seeing what's happening here and what I'm doing, right? So here's a horse. When I flip it around, it's a frog, right? So what does this tell us, right? It's really the same image, right? It's really the same thing that's being presented, but depending on where I'm standing, depending on how I'm looking at it, depending on my perception, I am visualizing and looking at the same image in two different ways, either a frog or a horse, right? So what does this tell us, right? This tells us that sometimes, right, I've got to look at life from a different perspective, right? Because I've got so used to looking at life through just one filter, then that's all I see and that's all I look at, right? But it's important for us sometimes to just stand at another space in another using another filter, right? So that I'm able to look at life from a different perspective, right? And that perspective that I want to kind of encourage you all to look at today is, instead of just looking, at life through this filter of all the things that are wrong, right? All the things that I'm anxious about, all the things that are not right about me, right? And working with a lot of young people, it could be from my body image issues, right? I don't like the way my hair looks. I don't like the way my skin is. I think my nose is too big. I don't like, whatever, my body size. It could be so many things, right? And then for someone with social anxiety, well, I really have nothing valuable to share. People think I'm dumb, so instead of looking at life constantly from that filter of all the things that I don't like about myself, right? Or I don't like about my life, or I think life has been unfair to me. I'm inviting all of you today, right, to take another perspective, to look at life from this other filter, right? Where I can look at my blessings, right? And see that, and I love this quote, right? It says, this is by Brother David, and he says that it is not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratitude that makes us joyful, right? So instead of running behind things, right, and in trying to make things better constantly, right, on that treadmill of life, I'm constantly running and trying to fix. Can I just pause and count my blessings instead? Right, because it's really gratitude that makes us joyful rather than the other way around, right? So I'm hoping this kind of sinks in. And I'm just taking a pause as you all look at this quote. It is not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratitude that makes us joyful. And this is Brother David that kind of says this. Okay. Good. So as this is sinking in, I want us to kind of think of mindfulness, right? I'm sure many of you have read about mindfulness or heard about mindfulness. And for those of you that have not, I would say, let's sort of like over here, right, instead of having my mind full of things that cause me anxiety, can I actually practice mindfulness? And what I like to do now is to actually do a mindfulness exercise with all of you, and kind of show you what that looks like, right? So before I do that, I want to just kind of share with you, what does mindfulness mean? Right, so mindfulness is really about living in the present moment, right? It's about purposefully bringing my attention to experiences that are occurring in the present moment without any judgment, right? So what does that look like, and why is that important? It's important because otherwise, as humans, we usually tend to live either in our past and look at all the things that are wrong, or we ruminate. So that's living the past. We ruminate about all the ifs and the buts, and I should have done this, but this happened, if this happened. Or I get hijacked by all my fears of the future, right? So then I end up catastrophizing, is what we call it, where I end up catastrophizing of all the things, and I imagine the worst things happening in the future, right? So I'm either living in the past and I'm ruminating about all the ifs and buts, or I get hijacked by my future and I'm catastrophizing. So mindfulness really says, hey, you know what? Let's just pause. Hit that pause button, and can I just be in the moment, right? Be just in the here and now, right? So now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we pretend that there is nothing to be anxious about, right? Because part of the human experiences, of course, there are going to be ups and downs, right? Of course, there are going to be setbacks. Of course, there are things that are going to cause me anxiety and sadness and anger and stress. That's part of the human experience, right? And it's not necessarily something that we need to run away from, right? Rather, if we embrace it, it makes us. I think it makes us more cautious. It makes us more grateful for the things that we do have, right? And just a simple example, right? Given the whole COVID situation, because we're anxious about, falling ill, we wash our hands, we maintain social distancing, we wear our masks, right? So anxiety per se as an emotion is not necessarily a bad thing, right? If it drives us to adopt healthy habits, right? But the trick is not to get overwhelmed by the anxieties of the future, right? It's not to get so bogged down that I lose sight of the present moment, right? So mindfulness puts you in the moment, and it kind of lets you know that in the moment, for example, right now, what is the moment that you and I are in? We're in this common moment together, right? You and I, through the screen, we both are in this common moment, and you're safe and I'm safe, right? In this moment, we both are safe, right? And that's what mindfulness reminds us, right? That in the moment, I'm okay. In the moment, it's fine, right? Um, so good. So I'm going to invite you all to kind of join me in a mindfulness exercise. This is known as the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, and it's a grounding exercise which helps you, ground yourself in the current moment. Like I said, in the current moment, you are safe and I'm safe, right? As we share this moment together. So good. So I'm going to invite you all to kind of join me in this practice. I want you all to just kind of sit back wherever you're sitting. Maybe it's on your bed, on your sofa, on your chair. Just kind of sit back and just take a moment to be, not in a moment, just take like 5 seconds to be mindful of your breath, right? So take a deep breath in with me. Hold it and let it go out. Okay, take another deep breath with me. Hold it and let it go out. Release it slowly. And as you take the other deep breath in, just be aware of your surroundings. Just look around, right? Be aware of your surroundings. So let's take another deep breath in together. Hold and let it out slowly, right? Now, as you're aware of the surroundings around you, look at 5 things that you can see. So, for example, you're looking at the computer. So, you're looking at your computer, you're looking at the keyboards, you're looking at me, you're looking at a slide. Maybe there are things beyond your computer. As you stretch your gaze, there are other things that you can see, right? So, look at the 5 things that you see. Maybe it's the plant in the background that you see, and just acknowledge it. So these are the 5 things that I see and I acknowledge it, right? Now, once we've done that, I want us to take a deep breath, and for the rest of this exercise, I want you to close your eyes, right? So let's take a deep breath in together. Close your eyes. As you release, continue to keep your eyes closed. And I want you to become aware of 4 things that you can touch. So perhaps it's your skin, perhaps it's the clothes you're wearing, perhaps it's where you're sitting, you touch something, and be aware of the textures that you feel as you touch things. Be aware of the sensation that you feel as you're touching these 4 things around you, and your eyes are still closed at this point. Good. I now invite you to try and acknowledge 3 things that you can hear. So don't judge anything, just hear. Right? So you can hear perhaps the sound of the fan in your room. You hear my voice. Maybe you hear, your breath as you breathe in. Maybe there's a sound in the computer that you hear. So be aware of 3 things that you can hear. Good job, guys. Wonderful. Next, I want you to name 2 things that you can smell. So take a deep breath in and see if there's something that you can smell from the environment around you. Maybe there's someone cooking in the background and those smells are coming in. Maybe it's the smell on your clothes. Maybe it's the subtle, fragrance in the air around you, of your hand, as you, take a deep breath in. Good. So we've looked at 5 things. We've acknowledged 4 things that we can touch. We acknowledged 3 things that we could hear. And then we noticed 2 things that we could smell, right? Now the last one, as you have your eyes closed, I want you all to just take another deep breath in and a deep breath out. And in your minds, right, even though there's chaos around you, maybe there's uncertainty, maybe there are things that you're feeling, I want you to become aware of one of your strengths. We all have strengths, right? So I want you to be aware of one of your strengths and call that strength to your mind. And even as you ground yourself in this moment, I want you to remind yourself of the strength. Remind yourself that you are safe and that you are strong, right? And that is part of your reality in the moment, right? Great job, guys. And thank you for being on this journey with me. So I just invite you again to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And if you want to slowly open your eyes and come back. Great. So thank you so much. I hope this was meaningful to all of you. And we've looked at the 5 strategies, and I'm going to kind of open this up for question and answers. And I want to leave us with this thought, right? Which this quote that says that too many of us are not living our dreams because we're living our fears, right? So it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that we can't constantly operate from our fears. We can't live from our fears, right? It's important for us to expand. And I'm hoping that through this experience of this webinar that we've had, I'm hoping this motivates you to take action. And for those of you that feel that you need to seek professional help, please do so. Like I've said, and I'll say this again a zillion times over, seeking professional help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength and courage, right? So please seek professional help, that is critical, right? So great job, guys. Thank you so much. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint at this time. I do have some questions that have been sent to me, and I'm going to attempt answering some of those questions. But before that, I just wanted to see if there's any other, and I see that there's some chats that are coming over here, so I'm going to start answering some of these questions. Great. Okay. Okay, so one of the questions is, can extroverts also experience social anxiety, right? Absolutely. Like I said, just because I'm an extrovert, it doesn't mean I don't experience social anxiety. Everybody, it has really nothing to do with the personality as much as, an illness. And I think one of the questions that someone asked is it actually, could it be a mental illness, right? Is it and yes, it is, right? Yes, it is. People have asked as to what are the causes of it. Sometimes it could be, a genetic predisposition, which is nature. It could be nurturing. It could be some of your early childhood experiences that might cause you to feel this way, right? So there are various reasons that happens. Okay, I'm just looking at the question, so just bear with me. Okay, so has the lockdown and social distancing rules been good or bad for individuals with social anxiety? I think that's a great question. And like I said, initially, I think especially for those people that I had been working with, for them, it was almost like it was a boon, right? That I can, I now have permission, social permission to isolate, right? But we know that really that isn't good, right? We can't isolate and live our lives. So while it may have been good, for the person in that short time, it really isn't good, right? It is actually bad, right? And I don't want to use the word bad, I apologize, but really it's unhealthy, right? So it's not necessarily healthy. Okay. The next question is, does improper development of self-concept lead to the emergence of social anxiety? Absolutely. So like I said, there are various reasons that one could be socially anxious. Part of it could be a genetic predisposition, right? Maybe anxiety kind of runs in the family. So there could be a genetic predisposition. But for a lot of other people, it could also be the nurture, right? It could be my childhood experience. Maybe I got bullied when I was really young. Maybe there have been traumatic childhood experiences that I've had. Maybe some of us come from families where maybe there was a lot of criticism. So yes, when the self-concept has not developed, my sense of esteem, my sense of respect, the ego, especially for those of you that are from this field, when that development has not happened, then yes, it can lead to social anxiety, right? The other question is social anxiety an emotional disorder? Yes, it is. And hence the good news is that it is also treatable, right? Good. Okay. The next is, how do you recommend reminding a former extrovert who has become bogged down by fears of the future, immediate and far reaching, to stay in the present? Great question. And I'm hoping, the last exercise that we did together, which was the mindfulness, I'm hoping that will, be a way for you to be able to stay in the future. The other is reminding yourself that, there are many positives around you, right? There are many strengths that you have, and almost collecting those strengths, right? Reminding yourselves of those strengths will definitely help, right? Okay, is the pandemic causing social anxiety amongst common man? So I think yes, so I wouldn't say it's causing social anxiety. Is it causing what we call anticipatory anxiety? Is it causing anxiety around, our future, about falling ill, about our family members falling ill, about jobs, about, yes, so it is causing anxiety. There's no doubt about it, right? That has triggered an almost a global sense of anxiety. So I would say yes, that has happened. Okay, let me see what else I can answer over here. Okay, so as a community or in a college setting, what initiatives can we implement So there's a lesser chance of someone getting social anxiety. Wonderful. And thank you so much for asking that question. I think, as a community, I think even holding sessions like this, right? I think this was very progressive. This was very insightful for the session to be held, so that people become more aware. There's, the more awareness we create, the easier it is for people, to understand, right? And I think also not, and once, school is back and we're back in, spaces where we're meeting people again face to face, I think, allowing people to engage in smaller groups, right? Not pressuring people from an academic point of view. These are all ways that we can kind of help someone with social anxiety. So good. So I'm conscious of the time. I know it's been about a little over an hour since we've been talking. So I'm going to take a pause now, and thank you again, everybody, for kind of being here and taking the time to stay. And I do hope that each of you has walked away with at least one learning, at least one technique or tip that you could use going forward. So thank you all again, and I hand it back to the presenters if there's anything that they need to do from a housekeeping perspective. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for being a wonderful collaborator on this. I just want to give another reminder that we will be circulating a feedback form. So this is for the people who want an e-certificate from this. So your name will be asked, your email ID, plus your feedback on what you think we should improve on webinars and everything. So please feel free to mention whatever you want. 1 minute. I think, is ma'am here? Miss Neeta Pereira, is she here?
Yes, Anushka.
Yes, ma'am. You can do the vote of thanks.
I'd like to take this opportunity to first of all thank the principal and the registrar for being so supportive, and especially with regard to mental health. Like Aparna mentioned, I think there's not enough spaces or scope to talk about mental health. Also, Aparna, to you, thank you. I think you've been awesome to cover a topic like social anxiety. It's large, but you've cut it down and you've made it so relevant and so experiential. So thank you. I think most of the people who attended, and me as well, I think we're going to take a lot back from this session. So thank you again. We're looking for long-term collaborations with you, and we're hoping that, we can collaborate together. A special shout out to my students, Ansi, Angeline, and Anushka. It was these three who thought about this concept, and they did all of it. They got in touch with Aparna. In fact, they came up with this idea. So also to the three of you, I think it's wonderful to have students like you all, because I see the passion you have for mental health and the need for such initiatives. You make work very interesting. Also, Isaac, Priyanshu, Dylan for being part of the team of tech support, and of course, organizing. And a big thank you to my Team Consilium. The association's always so passionate about mental health. They have an Instagram page running. They're reaching out to people on campus. So they're doing so much. So they want their presence felt. They want to break stigma. So I'm lucky to have students like this. And also a quick thank you to members of my faculty from St. Joseph's, HODs of various departments, also HODs and members of faculty from various institutions around the world and the country, students for being here. I know this is your Saturday, but we also wanted to have a time where everybody could be together, and Aparna gratefully agreed. So thanks again, all of you. I would like to leave you with a quote by John Lennon. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. So stay safe and take care, all of you. I know we're going through a pandemic. I think we'll get through this together. So thanks again. And thanks, Aparna. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend. Thank you, guys. A round of applause to everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. I think, everyone can start leaving. Okay.
Thank you for the team. Great job, guys. Thank you.